But what I'm going to do today is not a call to action, and it's not inflammatory. It's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of content dense, but unless you understand what people are asked to go through and the hoops they have to jump through and the hurdles that are put in their way, you really can't understand how almost impossible it's become to comply with what people ask you to do, to get from A to B. It's just really hard. So we're going to start out, I'm going to do, I was asked to do a little bit of a timeline on immigration, so we're going to do a little bit of an immigration history. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. You're going to have to suffer through my two favorite immigration quotes, and then my two favorite papal quotes. They're not long, but at least it really explains why we do what we do. People have told me I talk too fast. I had a court reporter yell at me one time telling me, I can't type as fast as you talk. So if I'm like going too fast, you can just tell me to slow down. I think I'm speaking so slowly people are gonna doze off. But apparently that's not the case. We're gonna start off doing that, and then we're gonna go through some myth busting, and we're gonna go through some of the asylum problems, the people who have, as they say, invaded from the southern border. But one quick tangent, when I talk about how angry this makes people, we have a YouTube channel, and I did a basic Know Your Rights presentation that I read verbatim from the American Immigration Lawyers Association. We all belong to the American Immigration Lawyers Association and something called the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, which is a subsidiary of the Catholic Conference of Bishops. Clinic gives us a lot of our technical support, and they're also equal parts cheerleader for us. So when we do well, they'll be on the phone saying, great job. But when we did this YouTube, I just read it from the American Immigration Lawyers Association because I didn't have time to write one, and I did 3. What if Immigration and Customs Enforcement stops you in your home? What if they stop you at your place of work? And what if they stop you in public? Somehow it got on X, and Marjorie Taylor Greene picked it up, and it ended up in, of all weird places, like the Daily Mail. Like I ended in a London tabloid, which is really, like, who cares in London? But saying things, she said that just as soon as she figures out who that woman is and where she works, she's going to subpoena her for her Doge committee and why she shouldn't defund me. But she doesn't fund me, so she can't defund me. And the video she hates started out with who I am and where I work. So figuring out who I am and where I work shouldn't have been that hard either. But the vitriol we got on our YouTube channel was so ugly, and the language was so foul, YouTube wouldn't let me read my own comments, that some of the language was so awful. And when I read when I read to my local police department what people had said, they offered to send squad cars out for a few days to patrol my house because people had made physical threats. And it's not hard to know where I live. I mean, when my mom died, I was the personal rep on her estate. So, I mean, it's not that hard to find out where I live. But the anger it incites in people, I don't know where it comes from. I can understand not liking people. There are certainly people in the world I'm not terribly fond of, but I don't know when it became fully fashionable to hate people you never met. And to really, like, at a real visceral level, people you've never met, they've never done anything to you, you don't know much about. So, and you'll see as we go through this, I have like no opinions. I'm completely like unbiased about everything, which isn't completely true. But, so we're gonna start out with some immigration myth busting. We're gonna talk about anchor babies, immigrants as criminals. Right now, if you just get a general sense of what people are talking about, everyone thinks that immigrants are criminals and drug runners and rapists and violent people. That they're drug smugglers. They also think for some reason they're getting public benefits. There was the rumor for a long time that the people coming from the southern border were getting checks as they came across. Who was giving them money? I mean, they weren't getting checks as they came across. We're also going to talk about immigrants as a drain on economy, the southern border invasion, that undocumented they have no constitutional rights. When I was reading the comments on our YouTube channel after the Know Your Rights presentation, what really hit me is like nobody seems to have passed high school civics anymore. Like they don't realize that people have basic constitutional rights regardless of your immigration status. You may not like it, but that doesn't make it not so. We're going to talk about a little bit about the background on asylum and some current asylum issues, some immigration issues at the court, the Cuban, Nicaraguan, Haitian, and Venezuelan programs, and temporary protected status. And it's a good thing I talk that fast because it's a bunch. So we're a group of 16 people in our program. Catholic Charities is a much bigger agency. They do child welfare and adoptions. They do supported parenting. They have a hoarding program, case management, and they have a mental health program. I'm just one of those programs, but we're the Refugee and Immigration Services program. We're a staff of 16. We have 4 attorneys, 5 paralegals, and the rest of the staff does basically education stuff. So our YouTube channel will also have things like, what's a FICO score? Why do you care about your FICO score? How do you fill out an I-9 form? How do you fill out an employment application? Just really nuts and bolts, basic stuff you would know if you grew up here, but you might not know if you didn't grow up here. In-house, we have English, Spanish, French, Burmese, Somali, Rohingya, Bembe, Dare, Pashto, Urdu, and more, but I can't remember. And we also, one of our goals is to provide up-to-date information. So we have a website that the Wheaton Franciscan Sisters kindly funded, as they did the YouTube channel. We have a TikTok channel, which we don't really use much, because nobody really knows what's going to happen to TikTok. And we've got a Facebook page. So for us, social media was the easiest way to get a word out there, because the rumors in the immigrant community right now are so strong, and they have such credibility that for us, the easiest way to get word out there quickly was just to be able to open up a laptop, record a quick video, and post it. And as soon as I could get people from stopping worrying about like their bangs didn't look right or like their mascara wasn't straight, it's like, okay, we just need to post the thing. And I have to admit, I really hate a couple of mine. But, so when we think about what Catholic social teaching and what the church has done for immigrants, it really gives you a heart in the Roman Catholic Church. I grew up one, I still am one, but it's this kind of thing I think that still keeps me one. Because the popes and the bishops have been both strong and incredibly eloquent voices for immigrants and for the poor. So you have Pope John Paul II, now St. John Paul II, not mincing his words, saying, "When I was a stranger, you welcomed me." It is the church's task not only to present constantly the Lord's teaching of faith, but also to indicate its appropriate application to the various situations which the changing times continue to create. Today, the illegal immigrant comes before us like that stranger in whom Jesus asked to be recognized. To welcome him and to show him solidarity is a duty of hospitality and fidelity to Christian identity itself. That is not mincing his words. That is, and for me at least, I think the affirmative things you have to do as a good Catholic are often much harder than the things you're not allowed to do. Like, you can't eat meat on Friday. You got to go to church on Sunday. You don't want to, get up early. You can go on Saturday. You can go late on Sunday. None of that's that hard. It's the affirmative things like getting to know people that you suspect maybe aren't the people you want to know. But getting to know people, giving people the benefit of the doubt, cutting people some slack, that can be a lot harder. And even Pope Benedict, the parable of the Good Samaritan remains as a standard which imposes universal love toward the needy whom we encounter by chance, whoever they may be. And I usually use these two quotes because I think these two popes are a better messenger for the people I need to convince. The people who tend to be really strong social justice Catholics love Pope Francis. Not everybody was as enthusiastic, but I think for the people who might be a little less amenable to the message that I have to send, I think to hear that St. John Paul II was telling you, you have a duty in fidelity to Christ's teaching to welcome the undocumented, is a pretty powerful statement. So, immigration law is ridiculously confusing. It is said to be the only thing that makes the tax code look user-friendly. And it's true. So this is from a case where literally the issue before the court was, had this guy been in the United States for 10 years? That's it. Not some weird maritime issue where they're talking about stevedores and who owns what clod of land under the sea. This was just, we had had on occasion to note the striking resemblance between some of the laws we are called upon to interpret and King Midas's labyrinth in ancient Crete. The tax laws and the Immigration and Nationality Acts are examples we have cited of Congress's ingenuity in passing statutes certain to accelerate the aging process of a judge. In this instance, Congress, pursuant to its virtually unfettered power to exclude or deport natives of other countries, and apparently confident in the aphorism that human skill properly applied can resolve any enigma that human inventiveness can create, has enacted a baffling skein of provisions for the INS and courts to disentangle. But Emboldened by Thesian courage and fortified by a close examination of the statute, we think the Board of Immigration Appeals got it wrong again and we're sending it back down one more time. This case went up for 10 years, just on whether the guy had been in the United States. I mean, you would think that's not that complicated of an issue. This case vividly illustrates the labyrinthine character of modern immigration laws, a hyper-technical maze of statutes and regulations that engender waste, delay, and confusion for the government and petitioners alike. The inscrutability of the current immigration law system and the interplay of the numerous amendments and alterations to that system by Congress just during the pendency of this case have spawned years of litigation, generated 2 separate opinions by the district court, consumed significant resources of this court, and with regret and astonishment, we determined, as again, we have to send it back down because we still can't decide. It is so complicated that one of my very favorite judges who retired referred to one of the immigration judges as having lapsed into incoherence and called another judge by name in a published opinion an embarrassment to American justice. I would be in therapy for the rest of my life. I know what I do. So we're going to talk now about a little bit of a history of a timeline, and this is probably the least exciting portion of it, but it's really interesting to watch who the Congress keyed in on at certain times in history. So the first big chunk of legislation you get is the Immigration Nationality Act of 1790, which basically was the first time they tried to define what is citizenship by naturalization. I've always hated that term. Naturalization applies like you're synthetic and then you naturalize and now like you're good. But naturalization is the process by which you apply to become a citizen of the United States. There's basically 3 ways you can get citizenship. You either get it, you acquire it the day you're born, or you derive it through your citizenship parents, your citizen parents, or you have to go apply for it. So this was the first time they really regulated the way you would go and apply for it. Then they had the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798, which was the first time they had deportation laws threatening people who they thought were political threats to the United States and deporting them. And this was mainly in response to conflicts in Europe at the time. They had the ban of importation onto any Negro, mulatto, or other person of color in 1803, which is a function of the Haitian Revolution that led Congress to ban immigration by free blacks to contain anti-slavery. People v. Hall, the Supreme Court ruled that the testimony of a Chinese man who witnessed a murder of a white man was not admissible testimony because the Chinese, along with Native and African Americans, could not testify in court. They weren't people, so they couldn't testify in court. The passenger cases, the Supreme Court designates the authority to legislate and enforce immigration restrictions to a matter of federal authority. We're still arguing about this, and there's going to be a couple more cases in this timeline, but we're still arguing whether or not the states can do this, like in Arizona and Texas, try to implement immigration law, or is that really a function of the federal government? It's pretty clear it's a function of the federal government. But the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which were really certain, there were treaty stipulations, but it was a law for the first time in immigration policy that was restrictive based on national origin, and it was strictly to stop Chinese immigrants from coming into the United States. You had Elk v. Wilkins. The Supreme Court ruled that the 14th Amendment did not apply to Native Americans. Okay, stop a minute. The people who predated us couldn't have citizenship here. Where are they going to go, right? I mean, they were born here, they've been here since long before we were, and they can't be United States citizens. So they don't get it by birth, and therefore they couldn't vote. The Che-Chan-Ping, United States, the Supreme Court decision affirmed that plenary powers of U.S. authorities over immigration matters. Again, this is saying that enforcing immigration law is up to the federal government, it's not up to the individual state governments to enforce immigration law. United States versus Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court established the precedent that any person born in the United States is a citizen, regardless of by race or by parent status. So this whole thing we've been hearing about of late, whether or not people born here are citizens, and the thought that maybe there was an executive order that the parents had to have some status in the United States, that's pretty clearly against the 14th Amendment. The judge in Washington who heard it, Washington State who heard it, said, where were the lawyers when they wrote this executive order? Like, he said he'd never heard anything so silly. What they did in response then was, normally if a federal judge sitting in his little chunk of geography called a circuit says they can't do something with immigration, they stop doing it nationally. So that it's not like you can do it in Minneapolis, but you can't do it in Texas. Well, the Supreme Court decided, well, no, we're not going to do it that way. If we're going to do it just in that little chunk of geography that belongs to that federal judge. So what happened was another federal judge out in the District of Columbia decided this whole thing was going to be a class action lawsuit and said all people applying for citizens belong to a class, and so now it's back to being a ban throughout the United States. What that really tells you, if anybody out there is a lawyer, is the most boring class you will ever take in law school is called civil procedure. It is mind-numbingly dull. But it's how you win cases, because it's how you think, oh, I'm just going to get a class action lawsuit, and that's how I'm going to win. You're not winning. You haven't even talked about the merits of your case yet. The Expatriation Act, I love this one. Under the principle that women assume the citizenship of their husbands, this act stripped citizenship from U.S.-born women when they married a non-immigrant, a non-citizen husband. Can you imagine? Before, my mom's been dead a few years now, but I remember reading her that one, and she was like apoplectic for a few minutes. The Immigration Act of 1917, although this law is best known for its creation of a barred zone extending from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, what it really did was it consisted of a literacy test, which was meant to stop some of the European immigration that was coming into the United States. If you think about it, in these days, everybody's worried about Europe coming, and now Europe's not coming so much as people coming up from the southern border. The emergency quota law, fears of increased immigration after the end of World War I and the spread of radicalism propelled Congress to enact an emergency measure imposing drastic quantitative caps on immigration. Ozawa v. United States, the hardening of the U.S. isolationism and the stage for the Supreme Court to affirm the 1790 Nationality Act stipulation that Asians are ineligible for naturalization because they are not white, regardless of their demonstrated acculturation or integration. Just a little racist, just a little bit. The Immigration Act of 1924, to further limit, this law established extended national origin quotas, which we still have. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. A highly restrictive and quantitative discriminatory system, the quota system would remain the primary means of determining immigration and admissibility until 65, but actually we're going to talk about this thing called the Visa Bulletin later, but it's the same thing. We restrict by country still. The Undesirable Aliens Act, it criminalized crossing the border outside an official port of entry. It was primarily designed to stop people coming in from Mexico between ports of entry. Ironically, he's retired now, but one of the great immigration attorneys had a guy who skied in from Canada. He was in Manitoba, he tried to ski across the border, but he hit a big snowstorm, and then he had to ski back in. Nobody thinks of people coming in unlawfully from Canada, but as we'll find out later, that is one of the new places for drugs to cross, is through Canada, not through Mexico. The Tidings-McDuffie Act, completing the racial exclusion of aliens, Congress imposed immigration restrictions on Filipinos by granting the Philippines independence. That way, they were not a colony of the United States, and they weren't nationals in the United States because they were now independent, so they couldn't be part of the United States. Executive Order 9066, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed a wartime order authorizing the roundup of incarceration of Japanese Americans within 100 miles of the West Coast. One of my mother's friends was rounded up, and to the day she died, she remembered her family being rounded up and what it meant for someone who had never harmed anybody, who'd never broken a law. Maybe jaywalking would be it, but to be rounded up and put in a concentration camp from a country that she loved. Repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the importance of China as the U.S. government's chief ally in the Pacific against Japan led them to repeal the Chinese exclusion laws. It's just a little bit of practicality. All of a sudden we need China, so we don't have the Chinese Exclusion Act, so now we repeal the Chinese Exclusion Acts because China's our best buddy in the against the Japanese in World War II. The Refugee Relief Act, so this was basically the beginning of allowing people to come to the United States. We didn't really have a refugee or asylee system much until after World War II. And we'll talk about this later, but this set up a quota of 214 visas to refugees, primarily from Europe, but 5,000 coming from the Far East to come to the United States as refugees. And we'll talk about what a refugee is in a minute. The Refugee Relief Act, go ahead. The Hart-Keller Act, This law set the main principles for immigration regulation still in force today. This is from 1965. This is 2025. It's still the main part of it today. It's in what you probably won't realize even after today is that this says that sort of our goal is family reunification with 75% of the visas, but it's really, really hard to immigrate through family-based immigration. So that may be our stated policy, but it's not what we've actually put into law. The Cuban Adjustment Act, the United States so hated Fidel Castro that they came up with a thing called the Cuban Adjustment Act, where anybody from Cuba who entered the United States lawfully, like a humanitarian parole, a visa, something, as long as they were here for 1 year, they got to apply for lawful permanent residency or a green card. They didn't have to go back. They didn't have to wait in line like 20 some odd years. They could just apply for lawful permanent residency. And that's still good law today. We just did one, I don't know, a couple months ago. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees began to set the protocols in '67. Those are really the framework for what is now the refugee system and the asylum system. The Indochina Migration Refugee Act of 1975, it made provisions to admit about 135,000 Vietnamese and other Southeast Asians after Saigon fell and to resettle them across the United States. The Mariel boat lift, and this is when I start remembering stuff. I was just back from study abroad in Madrid when the Mariel boat lift came. And 125,000 Cuban asylum seekers came to the United States, and a lot of my old friends were going up to Fort McCoy at the time, helping to resettle people who were Mariel boat people, and they had a hard time. Plyler v. Doe, if you've never read this, I'm sure a lot of you don't Google Supreme Court cases on Saturday morning going, hey, I need something to do. It's a great read. He talks about the enduring stigma of illiteracy and why people need an education. So it basically establishes that people, regardless of immigration status, have a right to go up to finish high school. The Immigration Reform Act of 1986, I wrote a perfectly fascinating 34-page paper on this if you ever want to read it. It's got 102 footnotes. But this was basically what a lot of us talk about as being the amnesty program. There were so many people here that they decided they had to do something. And what they did is they came up with delayed legalization, which we normally call the amnesty program. And it had two parts. One part was for people who had worked in fields and farms, and the other part was for people who had a minimum amount of time here. There are still some of these going on today. There were so many appeals, they went up and down, and stuff got lost and stuff got denied that wasn't supposed to get denied, and there was still stuff. I got a phone call from a woman last week who had been a client years ago, and her father's is still going on. The last note in the file says, we will contact you soon to schedule an interview in Milwaukee, and that was 1992. And he's still waiting for his interview. And nobody can, nobody seems to know like this file exists. But what was interesting about this was supposed to solve undocumented immigrants forever. The idea was, we're gonna give you a green card this time, and we're never gonna have this problem again. And it was the first time they created the I-9 form. So you know what an I-9 is? When you start a job, you gotta fill out this form that says that you're allowed to work here, that you're here legally, and like who you are. Well, what they did was, your employer is required to look at the proof that you can work here, but he doesn't have to make copies. So if you show your employer a pink Social Security card with a smiley face on it, he can say he's seen it, but he's never taken a copy of it. And it was almost meant, in my budding cynical opinions, it was almost meant not to work. Like, because you don't have to take a copy of it, if ICE comes in to look at your paperwork, you just have to check the box that says you saw it. Whether you actually saw it or not might be a different issue. The Immigration Act of 1990, there were a couple of these. There was also called IMFA, the Immigration Marriage Fraud Amendments in 1990. Basically, anyone who gets a green card based on a marriage of less than 2 years doesn't get a regular green card, because every marriage of under 2 years is presumed to be fraudulent. So you have to go back. So after you do this whole dog and pony show about getting your green card based on marriage, you have to go back and redo the whole dog and pony show 2 years later. And right now, those applications are taking over 2 years to process. The Chinese Student Protection Act, after the crackdown in Tiananmen Square, it was a law that permitted Chinese students living in the United States to get lawful permanent resident status. The Nicaraguan and Central American Relief Act, now just to give you an idea about how counterintuitive some of this stuff is, The people who are still using the Nicaraguan and Central American Relief Act are Latvians and Estonians. Because, of course, like, would you ever even think, if you were Latvian and Estonian, you wouldn't even open it up. But it was really meant for a way to solve, there were two parts to it, but one was meant to solve a big backlog and a problem they'd had with a ton of asylum cases coming up. Deferred action for childhood arrivals, we have a ton of deferred action for childhood arrivals, and this is more recent, and a lot of you have probably heard of it. One of the things that I've loved about DACA is when we had our first DACA kids, they were mainly in high school and really young and trying to figure out what they wanted to do to grow up. And now slowly we're kicking them out of Catholic Charities because they earn way too much money. And I kind of forgot to check on their income levels, and this guy drives in his Mercedes, and I look at his taxes, and he's earning a whole lot more than I have, and he's earning like 100 and something a year. I'm thinking, you really need to go find a private lawyer. And he's like, no, I don't want to find a private lawyer. I'm like, you got to find a private lawyer.
Donate.
Yeah. So Jackie's our mission advancement director, and she just said he can donate. So the public charge ground of inadmissibility, and the reason this slide is kind of good is this. This was one of those things that came out and freaked everybody out. When I downloaded it so I could read it and take notes and write all over it, it was like that thick. And it talked about this test for who's not going to be a drain on the economy. And the one thing is you had to be able to work. So the elderly and kids still in school almost couldn't immigrate because they couldn't work, they couldn't support themselves. If you had any medical conditions, if you didn't have health insurance. But you can't get health insurance if you're not here yet. You can't get health insurance if you're still living in wherever, because you gotta be here to get health insurance. You couldn't get, you were gonna be a public charge unless you had a certain educational level. And the reason I love this one now is this never took effect. I can't tell you how much time I spent piecing this thing apart, and then it never happened. So when we do public presentations, and we're gonna start doing them again at the end of October at the Pastoral Center, one of our challenges now is that everything is changing so quickly. We get an agenda together and we assign everybody topics, but what's blowing apart today will not be what's blowing apart by October 20th. And so we'll take the first half hour and go off script and talk about what's freaking everybody out on that day, as opposed to what we thought was going to be freaking everybody out when we started putting the presentation together a while ago. So a little myth busting, which is quick. Let me just see what time it is. Let's see if we should stop. So it's 9:02. Do you want to stop to do the first?
Sure.
Stop, could you make a quick break?
All right, so at your table there is a sheet with solidarity, rights, and responsibility on it. It's a handout on the back side of the prayer that we did this morning. I'm gonna let everybody find that. We're gonna spend a few minutes talking about solidarity. So we are one human family. Whatever our national, racial, ethnic, and economic and ideological differences are, we are our brothers and sisters' keepers, wherever they may be. Loving our neighbor has global dimensions in a very shrinking world. The gospel calls us to be peacemakers. Our love for all our sisters and brothers demands that we promote peace in a world surrounded by violence and conflict. So there's many ways to talk about solidarity, which is one of the Catholic teachings, Catholic social teachings. This is one way that we're going to look at it today. And next to that are some questions for reflection. To show compassion, from the root words common passion, means to suffer with another. And the questions at your table: when have you experienced deep compassion for the suffering of another? Have you ever experienced compassion for the suffering of a stranger? And do you believe that we are all really responsible for all? And if so, how does that challenge us? So we're going to take about 10 minutes, give you time to talk at your tables, and then we're going to turn it back to Barbara for more information.
You can be a great provider. You can be, I mean, pick your euphemisms. You can coach t-ball and soccer and your kids, whatever. You can be the Cub Scout leader. You will never be able to get a green card through marriage to a U.S. citizen, even though you have never committed a crime. And a lot of people don't realize that. When we give you a green card or that lawful permanent residency, it's called being admitted to the United States. Even if though you're already here, it's called being admitted. And there's a ton of reasons we won't admit you. Some of them make sense, some of them are a little kind of out there, but people don't realize that you can marry that U.S. citizen and you can have no contact with law enforcement, no criminal history, and you will never be able to get a green card through that marriage. So it's not that people won't stand in line or they won't follow the law. There's just no law for them to file. There's no mechanism for them to get lawful permanent residency. The other one I love is the anchor babies. I used to have a great meme for a little baby swaddled up in an anchor, but I couldn't find it. But it is true. United States citizens can apply for their parents. And if you're born here, you're a U.S. citizen. But you can't apply for your parents until you're 21 years old. So it's not a quick fix to anything. But the real kicker is if your parents come in unlawfully and they kind of like wander across that border and you enter illegally, you now have to leave for 10 years before you can start the whole process. So your anchor baby scheme isn't coming to fruition for 31 years. So that's not anybody's quick fix to anybody, is 31 years down the line. So people do come here unlawfully, but it's not really to have babies here because they can't get you anything for 31 years. Family-based immigration is easy. People don't realize, here's just one really, I think, glaring example of patent unfairness. Lawful permanent residents can apply for their children. Doesn't matter how old. They can be 90, they can be 9. You can apply for your children. But they can't be married. They have to be single. And if they get married while you're waiting in this process, you're done. It's over. All the time you've waited is lost. But those lawful permanent residents can apply for their children, and their children get to bring their own children along if they have them. It's called a family pack. I mean, that's what I call it. But you can bring their own children, but they can't get married. So you of necessity leave one parent back in the home country and the other parent coming here to the United States. So you of necessity split up the family. I joke sometimes, I'm the only person I know who works for an archdiocese who runs around screaming, "Don't get married." Because if you get married, you can't get a green card. And it leads people to try to go like to the chancery and try to get church-only weddings, not weddings that are recognized by the state of Wisconsin. But for a whole host of reasons, that's not a great idea. You want a legally binding marriage for all sorts of protections down the line in case the marriage breaks up. You want marital property. You want all kinds of stuff. If you can't, but if you can't get married, what are you going to do? And you want to immigrate and you want your kids to get an education, you're probably going to split up for a while. So this is the dread visa bulletin. Remember we talked about we give priority to certain countries over others? We also give priority to certain family relationships over others. So this is put out by the United States Department of State. It comes out every month. You can't use it until we're in the month it's designated for. So they usually come out like mid-month, but you can't use it until that month you're in. And then just to make it a little more confusing, the date they give you is not the first date you can apply, it's the first date you can't apply. Who would think of that? And unless you read the teeny little tiny writing at the top, you're not going to know that. But these are the family-based categories. There's 5 of them. There's family-based 1, 2A, 2B, 3, and 4. So if you're from Mexico and you are the brother or sister from someone from Mexico, they are processing those people right now who started in March of 2001. It's a 25-year wait. And although you could bring your children with you, they have to be under 21, but they're all going to be, even if they're not born yet, they're going to be over 21. If you're from the Philippines, they're processing brothers and sisters who started in 2006. If you're the adult child of a lawful permanent resident from Mexico, they're processing from 2007. If you're the adult married child of someone from Mexico, you're from 2001. And everybody's heard of fake marriages, like you've all heard the sham marriage idea. I had a client who got divorced, and they really got divorced. But they got divorced, and then he moved from one category to another with a much better date, and immigration tried to deport him for a sham divorce because he changed categories. I'm like, whoever heard of a sham divorce? The only other, complete tangent, the only other great sham story I have is one of the Roman Catholic sisters was going for her religious visa in her home country, and she went to her consulate to apply, and they asked her to name the 12 apostles instead of anything else that any bishop had signed off on. They just asked her to name the 12 apostles, and when she didn't do it fast enough, they told her she was a sham nun, and they denied her visa. It took her a month to get her back up. And I got the email saying she couldn't name the 12 apostles fast enough. I'm like, well, why don't you say St. Roger, St. Gilbert, St. Michael? Just give them 12 male names and see if they know who the 12 apostles are. So, the next one to talk about is immigrants as criminals. So, to understand this kind of construct, you have to understand that the last time they did any kind of statistic on this that I know of was in 2012. And for every year, for the previous 10 years, people in the United States spent $100 billion a year on illegal drugs. It's a huge business. It's $100 billion a year. Now, today, $100 billion of 2012 dollars is $142 billion today. So if you adjust for inflation, what was $100 billion in 2012 is $142 billion today. And compare that to other revenues of what we think of as being huge American corporations. Apple had 330, and this is their revenue, not their net income. This is just their revenue. They had a revenue of $395 billion, Walmart 685, Amazon 670, United Health 422. If you think about it, the drug dealers are making it probably tax-free. I'm not sure they're paying taxes on it to like the Mexican government. So they're making more than Walmart and Amazon combined selling illegal drugs. And if people are gonna buy them, they're gonna sell them. I mean, I don't know how you stop people from selling drugs. The thing is, and this is my completely really epiphany of the day, right, is that just because you're evil doesn't mean you're stupid. There are a lot of drug dealers who are really bright people. They might be evil as all get out, but they're not stupid. And as long as we're gonna buy them, they're gonna sell them. And the question is I don't know how you can't really stop them across the border. And we're gonna look at that later on. But of the United States Sentencing Commission, which is part of the US government, over 80% of the people sentenced for drug trafficking in the United States in 2024 were US citizens. They weren't immigrants. And the vast majority of the drugs are not coming in between ports of entry because you stick out too much. They're coming in at ports of entry because the ports of entry are so chaotic. They're coming in the spindles of tables, they're coming in cars, they're coming in a lot of furniture. Apparently furniture is a great way to smuggle drugs in. But they're coming in that way, and they're coming in at those borders because if you look at people, they're waiting hours and hours and hours to get across those ports of entry from Mexico to the United States. So most of the people coming in who are smuggling are US citizens coming in at ports of entry, which is gonna come up to the wall in a minute. But these are the main drugs that people are selling, bringing in by percentage. What's interesting to me is that the amount of drugs we're bringing in is really stable. Which drugs we're bringing in is really changing. So we all remember the big cases of the oxycodone and the OxyContin suing the drug company. Oxycodone's gone really down. Although when my mom died and Elm Grove had its Bring Back Your Drugs Day, I brought back 7 bottles of oxycodone. You know, I had my ankle surgery, I had knee surgery, and they give you, and I didn't take it. But I also took back, because my mom had been in hospice, I think a quart of synthetic morphine. And I'm sure the officer in Elm Grove was looking at me like, lady, where did you get all these drugs? I'm like, seriously, it's okay, I'm not doing any of them. But these are the drugs, but it has changed. The kind of drug we're taking is changing, but the amount we're bringing in is pretty consistent. So it's pretty hard to know what, when you're looking at statistics on who's been arrested, whether they're documented or undocumented, they don't always ask for your immigration status. So it's hard to tell by documented or undocumented status who's getting arrested. But in Texas, they had looked at some of those things, and the National Academy of Sciences went ahead and tried to pull that data together and said, despite its centrality to public and political discourse, we lack even basic information on fundamental questions regarding undocumented immigrants and crime. What they did do is they looked at Texas, who had done some work on that, and when they went through all of their data, they looked at native-born U.S. citizens between 2012 and 2018 and find that undocumented immigrants have a substantially lower crime rate than the native-born. Relative to undocumented immigrants, U.S.-born citizens are more than 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crime, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes. And that also holds true for documented immigrants, because if you commit those kinds of crimes as a documented immigrant, you get deported. And you don't even leave jail. You will be in like the state prison system, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement will pick you up in jail. So it's not like they have to find you. They pick you right up in jail, and you just never leave anybody's custody. You just go from the Wisconsin Department of Corrections to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So the people who have green cards aren't really committing crimes either, because for them, it's not just the jail time, it's they're separated from their families forever. So it's not, and I tried to pick what I think are pretty neutral sources as to, because right now, one of my things that is hard for us is that immigrants are painted as, the rapists, the drug dealers, the violent crimes, and I don't think anybody is ever going to tell you that they don't think that rapists should not be here. But that includes U.S. citizens. If they're rapists, shouldn't be here. No one's going to take them. But if you're a violent criminal, nobody really wants you, regardless of where you were born. But it's so easy to demonize people you've never met and you've never seen and have no face and no voice. But if you look at the cold, ugly data of it all, on the National Academy of Sciences, which pretty much doesn't have an axe to grind, they're a bunch of number crunchers. That U.S. born are much more likely to be arrested for violent crimes, drug crimes, and property crimes. Okay, so one thing that I think is one of the more kind of shocking statistics is the Customs and Border Protection's Human Resource Department released that more than 500 employees in the United States Border Crossing Security had been arrested for drug trafficking. And most of the CBP officers, and the ones locally, have been really kind to me when I've needed to fix like people's entry cards. One of the bishops came in and they gave him 3 days instead of 3 years, and she was really good about fixing his card and doing that kind of stuff. But if you want to be a drug dealer, that's a great job. That is the job you're going to go for. It's hard because there are certain jobs that attract the very people that shouldn't be in that job in the first place. And there's all kinds of examples of that. But even they've had problems with people in Customs and Border Protection trafficking drugs. So one thing that I think is a great statistic is this is the court system for immigration, which is an administrative law court. It's not like what you think of as being a federal court. It's an administrative law court. The judges apply for the jobs. They're not appointed. They're not appointed by the governor or they don't go through any kind of confirmation process. But of the 466,942 cases sent to the immigration courts this year, only 1.55% were for a criminal issue. The other 99% were for something else. And it's not because they couldn't catch the person, because they go to jail and pick you up in jail and then take you right back out. And even if they can't find you, they will issue a deportation order for you. So this is just because they're not committing crime. So I think if you get like 500,000 people put into deportation and less than 1.56% of it is for a criminal, it's a pretty clear indication that the immigrants are not committing massive amounts of crimes in the United States. There's also this rumor that immigrants are getting public benefits. I don't know how this thing started, but it won't die. There is the rumor that they were getting checks coming across the border. I don't know how that would happen. I got a phone call from a woman one time who knew that we were giving them money. I'm like, lady, if I had money, I would hire more staff. Like, I don't have a budget for giving people money. I wish I did. But she also thought we were randomly trafficking children from the southern border and Albania. And I don't know how Albania got in there, because I don't know a lot about Albania, but we are not trafficking children at all, much less Albania. But immigrants, even legally here, don't get public benefits. And there's a real disincentive for them to get the public benefits. So to get a public benefit, you have to be a qualified alien. And a qualified alien is a lawful permanent resident, a refugee, an asylee, someone who gets what they call humanitarian parole or Cuban or Haitian entrant. Certain battered women and children, people with something called withholding or removal. Those are the only people who are qualified immigrants. But just because you're a qualified immigrant doesn't mean you qualify. You have to be a qualified immigrant for 5 years before you qualify. On top of that, in family-based immigration, there is a presumption that you're going to try to get public benefits. So somebody, certainly the person who's applied for you, but if they don't make enough money, somebody else has to promise to repay the federal government the full value of any public benefit you get. Health care, food stamps, anything. And their income is topped off onto the immigrant's income when considering how much they make to get the public benefit. So I remember the very first one I did was a woman who was not very happy that her daughter married this guy from Mexico, and now I'm explaining to her that she's going to be responsible for any federal benefit he gets for the next 10 years. And now she's really not happy. I mean, she wasn't happy before, but now she's like, no. The only exception to this is refugees and asylees. They get Social Security disability for the first 7 years, and then they don't get anything. So one of our big pushes is to do one-on-one tutoring for people, refugees and asylees, so that they can get citizenship. A lot of them come from countries, for example, we are the largest Rohingya community in the United States. They don't have a written language. And in their home countries, they're not people. They can't go to school. So they have no education and no written language. And now to get citizenship, they have to learn to read and write in English. So, side note, if any of you are interested in becoming tutors, we have a number of Rohingya, Burmese, Spanish speakers, South American, who need to learn English. And the old citizenship model, we had to go to classes, doesn't work so much anymore. The one-on-one tutoring works a lot better. And I think in part it's because you can do it at your own convenience, and in part because people don't like looking stupid in public. You don't want to stand up as a full-grown adult and realize you can't conjugate a verb to save your life. It's much nicer to do it one-on-one with one person. And the tutors love it because you actually get to know somebody. You know, you actually get to form a relationship with someone, and people do it on their own time or at the library. You can do it on Zoom, you can do it in person, but that's just my slight tangential plug for if anybody wants to become a tutor. We've got lots of immigrants who would love to work with someone. The only benefit you do get as an undocumented is you get emergency Medicaid. You can only get you can only get inpatient care. The problem is once they can't discharge you because no one will take you. You can't get health insurance to go to a rehab facility. So there are people who are stuck as inpatient for literally 3-4 years because they can't discharge them, no one will take them. And the hospitals can't discharge them unless you can find an appropriate discharge plan. One of the common rants of a lot of the nurses in the hospitals is that people on end-stage renal failure will get admitted to the hospital, they'll get on dialysis inpatient, they will get better, and then they have to discharge them home. They go home, they can't get dialysis outpatient because they don't have health insurance, so they get sick again. Then they go back in the emergency room and they get inpatient and they go back on dialysis. They get charged back to home. It's just a circle and it keeps going forever and forever because they can't get any kind of health insurance. The flip side of getting public benefits is that they're also not a contribution, they don't contribute to the society. So basically, if you look at immigrant residents, there are, they have $1.7 trillion in spending power. So maybe if you can't appeal to their sense of being nice people, you could appeal to their sense of selling them stuff. They have $1.7 trillion in spending power. The age group, 77% of the people 16 to 64 are working. 5% of those 0 to 15, and even 18% over 65 are still working. And that is higher for the 16 to 64 category and the 65 plus category than the US born population. Their spending power is a group. Immigrant households' income have $2.4 trillion, and they pay $215.8 billion in taxes. The immigrants' contribution to Medicare is $58.7 billion, and as someone who's getting to that age, I am very grateful to that. almost 90% of the undocumented are of working age. There are 11 million undocumented workers in the United States, over 1 million undocumented entrepreneurs. You can incorporate as an undocumented. You can't get certain licensing. You can't sell liquor, but you can incorporate to have like a cleaning business, or you can incorporate to have a small store, but you can't get certain licensing. But of those, there are over 1 million undocumented entrepreneurs, small business owners. Of blended immigrant families, 2.9% of U.S. citizens live with an undocumented person, and 7.4% have a child living with at least one undocumented family members. And U.S. citizen children living with at least one undocumented parent is almost 6%. So that's 6% of the children in the United States worry about one parent being deported. The last one, that before we get into something a little more humorous, a little less content dense, and like, get me some more coffee, please, is people think that immigrants have no constitutional rights. And a man called me up one time and said, where in the Constitution does it say they have rights? And the Constitution's not like a grocery list. It's not like you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. But it does say that under the 5th and the 14th Amendment, every person has the right to life, liberty, and property with due process. So they are allowed due process, they have the right to life and liberty, and the 5th Amendment to remain silent. What's the difference between a documented and undocumented immigrant? And it's not what they call a term of art, meaning it doesn't have a definition. It's just a concept people made up. Basically, it means you don't have a document that allows you to be here. I mean, I've got a birth certificate from Columbia Hospital. I suppose that would be my document. I'm a U.S. citizen. Other people have a document that's a green card, or they have a document that's a work permit. But an undocumented person generally is a shorthand for that they don't have permission to be here. One of my old bosses used to call them document challenged as opposed to undocumented, but it basically means that you don't have permission to be here at the moment. But it's not, there's a number of terms that we all use kind of thinking that we all have the same meaning for it, but they're not. They appear nowhere in the Immigration Nationality Act. They're not part of the Code of Federal Regulations. They're just words that we've made up to try to give some structure to this kind of amorphous beastie that is kind of the Immigration Nationality Act. So the next thing we're going to talk about, this is the humorous interlude, because this isn't an inherently humorous topic. So, but if you're going to talk about building a wall, they're talking about building a wall only from the tip of Texas to the California, to the Sea of California. They're not talking about building a wall in the Gulf of Mexico or around California or up the Carolinas. It's only from the tip of Texas west. So look at Mexico. This is a picture of Mexico. Look at all the land or the coastline that Mexico has. There's like 15,000. Apparently, when I was looking this up, there's a lot of different ways to measure how much coastline you have. You can either measure every little like inlet, or you can just go like straight lines around. But suffice to say, there's a lot of Mexican coastline. You can build as much wall as you want, but for the Gulf of California, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, 5,800 miles of international waters that they would have to have. That just assumes none of these people know how to build a boat. Because what they're going to do is, rather than coming in through the tip of Texas west, they're going to come in like the Cubans, the Dominicans, and the Haitians, and you come in by boat. So it doesn't really stop people from coming in much. In fact, so many people come in by boat that we had to come up with something called the one wet foot, dry foot doctrine as to when were you actually in the United States. Did both feet have to be in land, or if one foot was still in the boat, were you still here yet, or had you not yet arrived? So I mean, imagine we had to come up with a whole legal doctrine called the one wet foot, one dry foot doctrine, just for people coming in by boat. So the wall is not going to stop anybody coming in by boat. People or drug smugglers, both, can come in by boat. And the drug smugglers have some really nice boats. Just as a side note, we're doing a bunch of stuff on my house, and the architect said there's a beautiful boat in the Milwaukee Harbor called the Change Order, that apparently someone put so many change orders on the work at her house that he funded a whole boat with it. And the first Trump administration, when they talked about building this wall, he put out this thing that he'd have all these expert wall climbers climb the wall and nobody could climb it. And when they asked for the people who were part of, apparently there is a wall climbing association in America, none of them knew what he was talking about, because none of them knew anybody who had been part of this experiment or done anything with it. But no matter what wall you build, and there were some great YouTube videos of, one of the previous walls was a series of concrete-filled pylons, and they had a great picture of two girls from Texas. It didn't take them 18 seconds to climb up and over it. They just literally shimmied up and over it. I can't do a YouTube on these kinds of things, but it's still out there if you want to look at it. But here's the wall, people just climbing up over the wall. If you can't get a wall, you build a tunnel. So this is a dry ice factory in Douglas, Arizona. And this is the Mexican police going down a pretty nice looking stairway into a drug tunnel. And mainly these are built by drug runners, and they're built along really heavy traveled highways, so you can't hear them digging. So it'll be along like a major thoroughfare, like it'll be along I-94 or US 1. I mean, it's in Mexico, but they can't hear them digging because of all the truck traffic. Here's one, it's got lighting. It's got PVC piping for the lighting. It's got a nice even floor. I could roll a wheelchair across it. It's got a rail system, so you can move people and goods more quickly. It's got supports. It's got another rail system. It's got an elevator. I'm joking for a while, I think this thing complies with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is more than my office does. But you could get anybody down this thing. But there's big money in it. And you go back to remembering we spend $100 billion on drugs every year. You build one of these, it's a lot easier to get that $100 billion worth of drugs into the United States. El Chapo, do you remember El Chapo?
Yes.
He built a tunnel out of maximum security prison. And what did he do with all the dirt? And so it's always my question, like, where did he put the dirt? But he broke out of jail by building a tunnel. So if people are imaginative, if they want to get in, they're going to get in. They're going to build a tunnel. So again, if you're going to spend $1 billion of illegal drugs, someone is going to buy them. So I want to talk a little bit about the southern border, what they're calling the invasion. 230,000 people came in legally through the southern border. They got an app on their phone called CBP1. And the people who were from Mexico, El Salvador had a much harder time because they were out at the border trying to get a signal on their phone. The people who were from further south, like from Venezuela, had a much easier time because they were in hotels, so they had Wi-Fi. But you had to download this app, wait for an appointment. Yeah, you had to keep waiting for an appointment because they only had so many of them. Then you were vetted by Customs and Border Protection for previous entries, previous deportations, criminal history. They fingerprinted you, and you got something called humanitarian parole. And that was your reward for coming here legally. When you got that humanitarian parole, you were then allowed to apply for a work permit. And then you could get a social security card, which meant in this state you could also get a driver's license. What nobody understood was, at the same time you got this humanitarian parole, they put you into deportation. They gave you something called a notice to appear, and that's how you start a deportation process. The minute they got the notice to appear, they no longer were eligible for work permits. It canceled their lawful status. So we let them in legally and immediately took the legal status away and took away the right to get a work permit or a social security number. Worse was, the people got court dates. This is really technical, but that notice to appear doesn't put you before a judge until they file it with the court. It still takes away your work permit even if they never file with the court. But a bunch of these notices to appear that stopped you getting a work permit were never filed with the court, but you didn't know that. You got a sheet of paper that told you you had to go to court when and where, and when you showed up, the guards wouldn't let you in the building because you didn't have to be in court. They never filed it with the court. So you get all these people showing up freaking out because they had a document that said, if you don't come to court this day, we're going to order you deported. And then they come to court and they won't let them in the building. The guards speak English and Spanish, but through the southern border, there's also a surge of people from Western Africa. And the guards do not speak Wolof and Lingala and Bembe. So they couldn't talk to these people. They're trying to use Google Translate and explain to people. First they had to figure out what language they didn't have in common, and then try to find that in Google Translate. And Google Translate for the esoteric languages can be a real lottery as to the quality of the translation you get. So it was just a mess down there. It was the first time for the 25 years I've been going down that I bet half the people were from Africa. They were not Central South American or Mexican. So the other thing that's part of this big, beautiful bill is that everybody who applies for asylum has to pay for it, and they have to pay for it every year their case is pending. I've had people's cases who are pending for 10 years. It's not their fault, they just can't get an interview. They're just too backed up. So it's not free, you have to pay for it every year, and you can no longer get a fee waiver for anything. You can't get a fee waiver for this, you can't get a fee waiver for the work permit, you gotta pay for the whole thing. Although you can't get a job yet. So how do you pay for it when you can't get a job yet? Also, all of these people are subject to something called expedited removal and mandatory detention. That means they have no right to see a judge, they have no right to defend themselves in a deportation proceeding unless they apply for asylum. That's the one exception. And so for people who have gone to some of the court hearings, the administration is offering to drop their deportation, and they think this is a gift from heaven because now they're not in deportation. What they don't realize is the minute they drop the deportation, they don't have an asylum claim pending, and now they get expedited removal. And that's how you've heard of people getting arrested at the court. My old joke to clients used to be, and it was true, that the only person I'd ever seen arrested at the immigration court was another lawyer who was mouthing off to a judge and absolutely had it coming. But now, if you allow them to drop your hearing, they can put you into expedited removal. Not only are you subject to expedited removal, you are subject to mandatory detention, meaning you have no right to apply for a bond. We don't have bail in the immigration system, it's a bond system. We don't have bond in Wisconsin, we're a bail state, but it's basically to pay your way to get out. You don't have a right to do that. You can ask for humanitarian parole, but you better be pretty sick before they're gonna let you out of jail on a humanitarian reason. But they are subject to expedited removal, and the problem with that is a myriad of things. But one is that the places they house you are rented county jail space, not in a city. And if you're gonna do this kind of immigration work, you need to find a lawyer in Milwaukee or Madison. There's nobody in the outlying areas, there's just not. And we house people in Dodge. For me to go to Dodge, I'm gonna lose half a day. For me to call somebody in Dodge, I need to get a 24-hour advance notice. I don't need any notice if I go in person, but I also lose half a day out of the office, which for me is just really hard. There's something else I was gonna say about that. Now we'll get there. The immigration court is, it's a mess right now. They've finally come up to a full complement of judges, and now a number of the judges have been fired. The chief immigration judge, who I appeared before and thought was wonderful, was fired, like the first day in the new administration took over. And Judge Payton, who was the assistant chief judge, was also fired. She got fired for 2 days after she took someone from Congress around the immigration court who asked for a tour. And she took the tour, and then she got fired. While on vacation, she got a 2-sentence email telling her she was fired. Now these judges are very different. These judges just apply for their jobs. So they come under the administrative purview. They are not under what we think of as being like the part of the Constitution that talks about the courts. These are the part that talk about the executive branch. One thing that we've done is if you are this person who's come, you've got this notice to appear, you're told to go to a certain court. and you're told you got to change address. But you're told to do all this in a packet of paper about that thick with teeny, teeny, tiny little type, and good luck understanding like any of it. It gives you hyperlinks to websites, assuming you have access to the internet and some way to get on the internet. But you have to change, to get your court case changed to where you live now, you have to file a change of venue motion, and you have to file service of process on the Office of the Principal Legal Advisor. You're all a whole lot of smart people with a lot of education behind you, and I bet you have no idea what I just said. So if you just got here from the southern border, you also, hello. There you go. I told Father Ruler, apparently there are places here that drop, and if I was going to say anything really controversial, I was going to go to a place where it was just going to drop, and you'd like never hear it. The problem with this is you change to move, right? And when you change your court date, you do a bunch of stuff that you don't even know you've done. One is you don't know that the law changes significantly from court to court. That's because the federal courts are divided into circuits. And the circuits have different laws. In our circuit, we do not have something called outward visibility. All the other circuits do. So this is a great circuit to apply for asylum. But nobody knows that. I mean, the immigration people know it, but nobody else does. So you move to an area that has less good law. You may or may not know it. You also, the minute you stop your case from going forward, you stop getting something called your clock. And you need 180 days on your clock. And if you do anything to stop your clock going forward, you don't get your 180 days. And you don't get a work permit, so you get 180 days on your clock. So if you move your case because you originally were going to go to California and now you're in Milwaukee, you need to change your court case, and now you've stopped your clock. You also stop your clock if you ask the judge for time to find a lawyer. Because if you don't know like what asylum is or how to put it together, and you ask for time to find a lawyer, you have stopped your clock. But nobody knows that. So we've got all these people coming in to apply for work permits, and they don't qualify for work permits because their clocks are stopped. And they don't know what a clock is. So we've actually taken to doing open presentations every Friday at 10 on asylum and what the clock is, because we just can't keep up with the people at the door asking all the questions. So on our YouTube channel, we just recorded a long video in Spanish, and they just come in and watch it, and then they can ask questions, because otherwise we just can't keep up with the people asking questions. One of the problems they're having right now is the lack of immigration attorneys, the lack of people doing this. A lot of the Milwaukee people no longer want to do immigration court work because the court's in Chicago. And as Jackie will tell you, my idea of heaven is not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get on the 6 o'clock Amtrak to get to Chicago. I hate early morning. And nobody else does either. And it's gotten so hard to win the cases that people aren't doing court work anymore. So the number of representatives plunged. At the end of fiscal year 2019, 65% of the people had lawyers. At the end of 2023, only 30% had lawyers. And your win rate with a lawyer is something like, one of the old statistics is it's 180 times greater with a lawyer than without. Because if you're not a lawyer, great example, my very first asylum client came to me and I said, why are you applying for asylum? Why did you come to the United States, and why are you applying for asylum? And he said, because my sister's in Boston. I'm like, no, you're coming to the United States because you were condemned to die in a Shira court. You just came to the United States like instead of Sweden because your sister's in Boston. You didn't come to the United States because your sister was in Boston. You came because you didn't want to die. But people don't know how to formulate that, and they don't know that general societal violence, no matter how ugly it is not asylum. You have to tie it to one of 5 protected grounds, or you're not getting asylum. So since the beginning of this administration, 103 immigration judges have been fired or voluntarily quit. There are 3,461,637 cases pending at the court. Only 1.49% of those involve a criminal issue, and there are almost 57,000 people in detention. You have no right to an attorney unless you can pay for one. So even though you're in jail, it's a civil proceeding. It's not a criminal proceeding, so you have no right to an attorney unless you can pay one who will go out there. And those are really time-consuming cases to take, because going out to the detention centers is really hard. And we're going to talk about habeas petitions in a minute, if I'm not talking over my...
Nope, you're good.
I got 5 minutes. I'll talk faster.
You got time.
I'll talk faster.
Faster.
I had a judge tell me, you could do a 4-hour hearing in 5 minutes. I'm like, sorry, I'll slow down. But the University of Syracuse track is a great place to look at some of these statistics. They put this stuff up and they track it from the court. It's nice because the court is no longer allowed to give out statistics voluntarily. We no longer have quarterly meetings with the judges, and we no longer have quarterly meetings with immigration because they were told they can't meet with us anymore. The court has posted signs telling people to self-deport. And the sign says, self-deport now or you will never live the American dream. Now, if you leave, you're gonna have an order of deportation and you're not coming back. If you come back after an order of deportation, your life is really complicated and you sometimes can't fix it. If you have a hearing in front of a judge, there's a good chance you're gonna win that hearing in front of a judge. Why would you self-deport? Instead of leaving with a deportation order, you might leave with lawful permanent residency or green card, which is pretty common. If you have a decent case and you have a lawyer who knows how to put together the brief and the submissions and the stuff, the judges are not like vile people, they're pretty decent. But if you leave and if you take that government notice that you should leave, you're toast. It's just over. And again, the government attorneys have been told to tell people that they will drop the proceedings against them, which is fine, except now they no longer have an application pending for asylum, which means mandatory detention and expedited removal, because they don't know that the consequence for getting out of what they think is this predicament is that they're in a bigger predicament. So we're ending the CNHV program. We allowed people to have sponsors to come to the United States. So a U.S. sponsor had to file what they called an affidavit of support with sufficient income to support you and promise they could live with you and promise they would make sure you didn't need anything and help you to get adjusted to the United States and help you apply for your stuff and get hooked up with medical care and school and all kinds of stuff. They all entered legally for 2-year periods, and there's 214,000 Haitians, 117,000 Venezuelans, 111,000 Cubans, 96,000 Nicaraguans, and that is all over. All of these people are now struggling to find a way to stay here lawfully. They've been here for 2 years, they have jobs, they come from countries where they don't want to go back to. Haiti is a mess, Venezuela is a mess, Cuba is a mess, and Nicaragua is a mess. I mean, both politically, economically, there are no places you want to live right now. And those programs are over, and all these people are struggling to figure out how they're going to stay here. And I don't know, they're going to apply for asylum. I don't know what. We don't get many Haitians up here. We have a lot of Nicaraguans, a lot of Venezuelans, and some Cubans, not a ton. And I think, habeas, one more thing. If you have someone taken into custody and you don't think they were lawfully taken into custody, you file something called a habeas petition. It basically means to bring the body in front of a judge and I want to know why this person's incarcerated. But you have to file in the federal district where the person is. So for us, we're the Eastern District of Wisconsin. Madison's the Western District. I'm admitted to the Eastern District of Wisconsin. I'm not admitted to the Western District. I suppose I could, but I've never done it. But if they move you, which is what they're doing right now, if you're in Dodge County Jail, you might just be there for a couple of days, and then they're going to move you to Kentucky, and then they're going to move you to California, then they're going to move you to Louisiana. When they move you around, you have to find a lawyer admitted to that area where you are now living or now detained to file the habeas petition. So a friend said he was filing one Saturday and found out that the client had been moved in the middle of the night to Louisiana, and he's not admitted in Louisiana. He's only admitted in Wisconsin. So one of our pro bono attorneys was saying we should try to get a cohort of attorneys together from the different districts who would just take referrals on the fly to file habeas petitions. But what had been the safeguard of unlawful restraint is really been ebbed by the fact that you can't find your client, and B, if you can't find them, good luck if you're actually admitted, because most of us don't get admitted to all 50 districts. And there's more than 50 because the big states have more than one district. And so that's my blah blah. First of all, I think you getting up here at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning is remarkable. I'm like, it's pretty impressive that anybody would come on a Saturday morning when you don't have to. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for listening. I know this is not, there's no plot to any of this. It's not always the most interesting presentation you ever come to. But if you're gonna really understand how harsh it's gotten for immigrants, you kind of have to know the content-dense, less exciting stuff.